everyone. Thank you for joining me again. Today I've got another experience as usual. This podcast, it takes a large leap of faith to believe you are not the biological human being that is living and breathing in this physical world, and you are actually much, much more than that. Now, most people have heard that they're a soul or a spirit or consciousness, but what does that actually mean? Is that actually possible? Can that actually even be described? It seems too good to be true sometimes that you are this eternal spiritual being that is just having an experience in a human body. And I can relate to that. Sometimes you're just not in a space to believe that is possible, and I get like that myself sometimes, despite having numerous mystical experiences, which has pretty much proven to me, not pretty much, it has proven to me that there is more to this reality than we can see with our human eyes. But for those of you who aren't lucky enough to have had a near-death experience or have something mystical happen to them, this is the next best thing, I guess, is researching this topic and having a look at what other people say is what they have experienced, what their connection to this other dimension, to God, to the universe is like, and what it looks like to them. And that is why I like to explore this topic, because it solidifies that knowing within myself of what is beyond the world we live in here and now. So let's get into this week's experience. So this one is from a lady called Dawn T. It looks like there's a fairly long intro before you actually get into the experience. So if you want to skip through, 10 minutes or so, I think most of it is going to be a build up to the actual experience itself, but I'll just read it all from start to finish anyway. All right, let's go. I'm going to lead into this story with a bit of personal background to shine a light on where I was mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. So please bear with me. It was late February or early March of 1987 when I was finally diagnosed and needed surgery. I had been battling a severe sinus infection for the previous 10 months, the result of a failed root canal performed by a poorly skilled endodontist. He punctured the end of a root on the molar he'd been trying to save, right through into my left maxillary sinus cavity. Yes, there are good reasons to fear root canals, because not all are successful. The tooth may be lost anyway and can lead to some major complications. After many months of antibiotics, doctor appointments and pain, my primary care doctor referred me to an ear, nose and throat specialist. This doctor informed me that I needed surgery. After reviewing x-rays and my history, she went on to explain, the infection will not clear up permanently, as evidenced by the multiple rounds of antibiotics over the last year. Your nasal passage is much too narrow on that side, and there is no drainage or adequate airflow. This infectious cycle will keep repeating. In the big picture, a prolonged infection that close to the brain is not good. It could end up fatal if ignored and repeated rounds of antibiotics is not good for your overall health. You need surgery to take care of it once and for all. Who knew these hollow, snot-producing caverns in our skull could wreak so much havoc? Unbelievable. At that moment, all I heard was surgery, which meant general anesthesia, which meant I was now completely frightened, as I'd never had general anesthetic before. I knew sometimes people died from these drugs. My anxiety and catastrophic thinking kicked into high gear. I not only wondered what would happen to my 3-year-old daughter and 4-year-old son if I should die on the table, how would they fare in life without a mum? After all, I did have an aunt who died in a dentist chair after a fatal reaction to anesthesia, not even general anesthesia. However, I also feared where I might end up if I actually did die. The what-ifs were driving a chaotic train of destructive thoughts, and I couldn't seem to stop. The thought of possibly leaving my precious children motherless, was crippling. Not to mention my fear of death itself. I know there was nothing saying I would have any complications in surgery, let alone death, although that was the mental leap I had made at that time, for reasons I will soon explain. I had spent 1st through to 8th grade in a Catholic convent school, where we were taught by nuns and priests. I was conditioned to think I was horrible, as is all of mankind, a sinner destined for hell. In the back of my mind as an adult, I could sometimes logically reason they used the fear and intimidation tactics as a way to control us. But still, what if they were right? What if this was our future? If we were anything less than a devout, self-flagellating Catholic Christian, I was scared and didn't see a clear path to face this dilemma. I had spent the years since leaving Catholic school, distancing myself as far as possible from the wrathful and vengeful God I had been taught to fear. The picture of God painted by the nuns and priests during those years was nothing short of terrifying and bordered on a monster bent on destroying us. It had only been in the previous 3 months that I ventured back into any form of faith or church, and it wasn't a Catholic one. I remember being told stepping into any non-Catholic was a supposed sin in and of itself. No Catholic would ever venture into a Protestant church or its congregants, no matter how far they had backslidden from the perfect Catholic truth. Even the non-denominational churches were considered evil in the eyes of the Catholics, or so I'd been taught. Some reading this may wonder, why look into any form of orthodox faith after having lived through the trauma of Catholicism in the late 60s? Analytically speaking, it wasn't planned by any means, and had life been the picture-perfect postcard, I probably would never have sought out any faith-based belief at all. But here's why I did. After the birth of my children, I began suffering from panic and anxiety attacks. When my daughter was about a year old and my son was 2, these attacks were random and out of the blue. The only precursors to the full-blown hyperventilating, near losing consciousness episodes were insomnia and some hand tremors. But realistically, What mother of small children doesn't go through some insomnia, right? Maybe the hand tremors were that second cup of coffee, or maybe low blood sugar. It was when this anxiety became accompanied by an irregular heartbeat that I began to think something was seriously wrong. I soon found out the irregularities were premature ventricular contractions. They were not painful, but easily felt and very disturbing. It almost felt like my heart was missing a beat and then starting up again with an initial hard thud. These disruptive heartbeats added a lot of additional anxiety to the free-floating stuff I already could not manage. I felt my mind and body were literally going haywire, and I had no control. Mountains of cardiac tests, monitors, stress tests, and blood tests revealed nothing. In passing, one cardiac doctor mentioned my thyroid hormone levels were a bit off, but also quickly added, we are going to make sure your heart is okay. My response was, of course, yes, please make sure my heart isn't going to stop or blow up. I've got little ones to take care of. The final diagnosis was a benign electromechanical cardiac dysfunction. In other words, they didn't know what was going on. They had performed all of the cardiac tests and determined my heart itself was not the issue, and for that I was grateful. However, that's where the testing stopped. The doctors gave it a label, advised no caffeine, prescribed a beta blocker to control the arrhythmias, Xanax to control the panic, and a referral to a psychologist to work out whatever deep-seated problems were disrupting what should be and otherwise be a young mother's utopia. I was a stay-at-home mum with two beautiful children and a comfortable home. Yet, in short, I was a total mess. The panic attacks and irregular heartbeat condition was in fact a very complicated and rare thyroid condition that wasn't diagnosed for another 22 years. The discovery of the grapefruit-sized goiter compressing my aorta and collapsing my trachea also has a paranormal twist via an auto accident, but that is a story for another time. The combination of the prolonged sinus infection, anxiety, irregular heartbeats, and the humiliation of talking with a psychologist about the details of a rough and sometimes abusive childhood, not to mention having to take medication to control this mess at 28 years old, made me seek something bigger than myself. This is when I began my journey back into some sort of faith. After a particularly difficult day, in which I couldn't even drive my car because of the panic, I felt like I was looking down a black hole and was losing my mind. I went outside to get the mail from the box, and it was in a brochure form from a non-denominational church in our area. It was approaching holiday season, and they wanted to get the word out for their activities. There was a blurb about a women's study group that was starting up, and I decided to reach out to that women's group and hope for the best. I felt like I'd been thrown a rope that day, and it gave me hope. Within a week or so, I began attending the study group with about 8 other women. Most were my age, and the girl leading the group had 2 daughters that were the same age as my children. She was a Bible college graduate, as was her husband. Together, they had been immersed in this faith nearly all their lives. So I reasoned she was more than qualified to direct others on this path. Nearly everyone in the group could be called what the born-again like to term mature Christians. As opposed to me, I was the definite newbie. I actually look back on this experience with some ire. Mature Christian? Should there even be such a thing as a mature Christian? Oh, sure, there will be those that learn the 66 books of chosen scripture and repeat back what they perceive to be the intended interpretation. Who are actually parroting what they've heard via a pastor in a pulpit that may or may not have an accurate grasp on biblical history. But is that really maturity, or is that just conditioning to believe the orthodox agenda? The first century beginnings of Orthodox Christianity via Roman Catholicism believed we couldn't navigate any faith on our own, hence the priesthood. Centuries later, people are still being directed as to what to believe, taught by those called mature Christians. How many actually dig deeply to determine what they are believing is the absolute truth? How many are willing to remain open-minded where there is no possibility of verifying truth that has been lost to antiquity? How many are believing what they believe because they have been taught to fear the fires of hell, or they don't conform to the prescribed belief system? Anyway, I digress, and this too is a story for another time. So I'm part of this women's study group, and I began learning all the standard Orthodox Christian stuff, with less of a focus on the punishing, hateful God of the Catholic denomination, and I find it did help alleviate some of the anxiety. I was taught, pretty much for the first time, that God was alleged to be caring, kind, and loving, that his love for us was not conditional, but the relationship with him was conditional. If we wanted to be right standing with him, we needed to be sure to believe the right way in the right things to attain this right standing. This smacked of the same things the Catholics taught, which bothered me. After all, who was right? If all the various beliefs teach that their way is the only way, which one is correct? Did God actually have a single path? I asked this question, and I was told yes. That is exactly the way it is. I was taught this is called the narrow path, as opposed to the wide path that leads to destruction. I thought, well, damn, I don't want to be on the wrong path. That wide path that leads to destruction and ends in hell sounds reminiscent of the past I have surgery coming up. I better make sure I get it right. So I reasoned I would and could do this. I could have this belief in a caring, kind, and loving God. After all, I hadn't totally rejected the thought of a creator, had I? No, I hadn't. And maybe this was the right path, and I had just not seen it before, because I'd been so mired and traumatized by religion growing up. I have to admit, it was a comfort in the midst of the health mess and anxiety with which I was dealing with. The Bible study leader that essentially led me into the faith focused on my sense of control, or lack thereof in my case, to show me that if I was not in control of my life, my health, or the anxiety I was suffering, then who was? She used many scriptures to prove the point that anyone outside of a Christian, Bible-believing viewpoint was just lost and that at the mercy of the world's random misfortunes. A sentence that literally shook my foundation and had me running to accept this Christian faith. If you believe you are in control of your life, you are believing a lie right out of the pit of hell. Did this scare me? Was I afraid? You bet. I'm sure she was sincere and well-meaning in her quest to save my soul from damnation. I also think that I was ripe for the picking, so to speak. I needed something to hang on to, and she helped light that path at that time. It wouldn't be until many years later that the confining, damning, fear-based, and limiting beliefs of orthodox man-made religion that for me found their birth in the health issues that plagued me then would be challenged, re-examined, torn apart, and established anew. That is truly the amazing story of freedom, but once again, a story for another time. My newfound faith helped me believe that someone bigger than me was in control and that I could appeal to him through prayer or for my own fears and for the protection of my children. So that's what I did. I prayed for comfort as I faced this surgery and that the worried thoughts of dying on the table would subside and that if I did happen to die, I wouldn't go to hell. After all, I was on the winning team now, right? But more important to me, I prayed that my children would be safe, well, and protected no matter the outcome. The day of the surgery arrived, and I had a sense of calm. I did feel comforted, believing that I had appealed to God to look out for my children and myself. It would have to be enough. I was still nervous about the anesthesia, but realistically, I didn't have a choice if I wanted to be alive, healthy, and pain-free, providing the surgery was a success and not like the root canal that began this saga. At what point during the surgery I began to move through the tunnel toward the light, I can't say for sure. The last thing I remembered was counting, as asked by the anaesthetologist, then darkness, then the tunnel, and moving toward it, then into it. It was an amazing and unearthly bright light. The quality and brightness of this light is not describable. We don't really have words for it. Without hesitation, I stepped right into the light and emerged into a vibrant, beyond beautiful field. Again, there are no words. The light was more brilliant, more illuminated than that of 1,000 suns, but not painful to my eyes. The trees, shrubs, and field grasses were much more real than anything I had ever seen before. It was as though everything I had seen before, consciously in my body, was just a dull, colourless photo. I got this distinct sense that everything we experience in a body will be dulled because we have to interpret everything through organic systems. Once we escape the organic is when we see the real. I was met by a man that I knew to be Jesus. but I also sensed he might be a different person to different people. That he was whomever someone needed him to be. In my case, he was Jesus, though no name was ever given. I just intuitively knew his identity. He was of average height and weight, dark hair that was somewhat short, definitely not long, a short dark beard and green eyes. He wore a light-coloured, roughly woven shirt and dark pants. Very average. Everything except his smile. His smile definitely was not average. He smiled a lot, and it was broad and big, always reaching his green eyes. It was infectious and contained a tangible warmth that is unknown on this planet. He was by far the happiest, most joyful, bubbly, and expressive person I have ever met. Not all the smiling faces I've witnessed in my lifetime could come close to the love and emotion he expressed with his smile. His presence was as beautiful as the place I was in, and in this place there was peace, freedom, and love. It enveloped me, moved through me, and was everywhere. We began walking through these beautiful fields, a slow and casual pace, much like a stroll. He was communicating with me telepathically. Though I can't remember specifically what was being conveyed, I know it was like small talk, a light-hearted, easy flow, an exchange that was neither rushed nor pointed, rather just existing in one another's presence. As we were walking, a question came to mind and I stopped. He stopped as well and faced me. I looked into his face and spoke verbally, asking, "How do you do a life?" Those were my exact words. He broke into the happiest smile ever and chuckling said, "It's so simple. Like this." Those were his exact words. At that, he brought his hands in front of his chest and then spread his hands and forearms in a horizontal arch, waist high, palms up, coming to rest at his sides. In that microsecond, after his words and gesture, everything ever made perfect and complete sense. Absolutely everything. And it was so very simple. At that moment, the feeling that washed over me was so far beyond words. I can only cry as I type a description of this event. The freedom that came from was accompanied by relief, love, and indescribable joy. These feelings were the facts of our true life. It's who we are at our very core. He was chuckling and downright laughing as he watched me come to a full understanding of what was bursting forth into my consciousness and the understanding I was absorbing. I came to know at that moment there is such a thing as full knowledge. I was humbling. It was humbling, breathtaking, and so very simple. Nothing is complicated on the other side. I remember thinking, how do we not know this? We Homo sapiens occupying this planet. It was so utterly simple and is always all good. I knew in that second the answer to any question my mind could conceive. It was so beautifully simple and completely effortless. In that space there was a total absence of fear, because all is known, nothing is hidden. Every aspect of life was in complete and perfect harmony with what was chosen and intended. I had been given a glimpse into the eternal. I knew at that time that in the end, all that transpires in life is as it should be. The deep core worry and anxiety that drives our daily lives with what ifs is not only unnecessary, it is destructive and robs us of our peace and the ability to live in the present moment. I had never felt so free, content, and happy. We began walking again, and he continued telepathically communicating. Basically, he was now expanding on his perspective of a life, using mine as an example, telling me about my life from an eternal perspective. Though I can't remember the exact details as they flowed through him, I did know the answers to life's questions that I had encountered and pondered during my life. It was always for my good. It always made sense, and it was a collaborative effort that was chosen and of which I was a part. Eventually we came to a stop, and he telepathically let me know I needed to go back via the dark tunnel through which I had come. While I did have a feeling like I wanted to stay, I knew that this was not my time to stay. My children came to mind, and it was intended that I be there for them. So I felt no reluctance when it was time to travel back. I knew it was exactly as it was meant to be, and I felt like I had been given some inside knowledge, and it was wonderful. He was smiling and happy as I entered the tunnel and was watching me as I began to move into it. I got a short distance down the tunnel and my hearing came back. I could hear the nurses talking. I heard one say, "I don't know why she isn't responding. She has vitals." When I heard this, I wanted to shout, "I'm here, I'm right here." However, I didn't have the ability to speak. I wasn't actually in my body and I had no control. A little further along, my eyesight returned, and I knew I was in a brightly lit room, as I could sense the light through my eyelids. Further still, I began slipping back into my body, and I was slammed by the most excruciating pain I had ever experienced. I thought, "Oh my God, I can't be here." I wanted desperately to go back up and return to where I had been. I could feel him gently nudge me forward and assure me that I could do this. Then, with a rather hard jolt, I was there, back in my body and all my organic senses functioning. At that moment, a nurse at my side said, "There you are. You had us worried. You've been unresponsive for a very long time." Through the blinding pain, I asked her, "Am I on Earth?" She responded, "Of course you are. Where else would you be?" I told her I wasn't here and that I have all the answers, but I hurt so bad. She said, "Oh, I bet you do," then yelled, "Can we get some pain meds over here?" At that point, she covered my nose and eyes with a cloth because my sinuses were still bleeding from the surgery. I desperately wanted to tell someone that I had the answers, why we are here, what it all means, and that it is all so very simple. As I struggled with the pain, the effects of the pain medication and the covering on my face, I couldn't talk and didn't even want to move. So I also couldn't grasp all of what I've been told on the other side. I felt the knowledge slipping away, as though my organic brain could not hold the magnitude of this information. It reminded me of water slipping through my fingers. I just couldn't hold it, no matter how hard I tried. At the same time, I could telepathically hear him chuckling and saying, "You won't remember. You won't remember." As the nurses were getting me ready to take me to my room, they'd replaced the cloth covering on my face with a smaller bandage, and I now looked at my surroundings. It was a brightly lit room, very brightly lit, as surgical recovery rooms are. However, it seems grey, dull, and dingy, nearly foggy compared to where I had been. The light in this room was nothing close to the light on the other side. The realization hit me. Oh my God, we live in this. We live in this murky, foggy soup of a world. There is no clarity, and it is as if we are walking in the dark. We can't see our next step, and everything here is shadowy, vague, and colourless. There is so much confusion, and we are existing with such limited knowledge. I was horrified at the stark contrast to where I'd just been. I felt sad and somewhat lost. I spent that first night in the hospital. The pain was horrible, and the pain medication caused so much nausea and vomiting. It was difficult to sleep. However, when I did finally fall asleep, I had the exact same experience I had during the surgery. This experience was also in the same order. I slipped out of my body, which was wonderful because it left behind the pain. I travelled through the tunnel, leaving behind my eyesight, then my hearing, and arriving at the bright light and stepping through. He met me once again, and we picked up our walk and telepathic conversation right where we had left off. It was as if we had just hit pause for a brief period of time. When it was time for me to wake up, I travelled the tunnel in reverse, much like the time after the surgery. I left the bright light, with him joyfully bidding me goodbye. My hearing returned, then my eyesight, and when finally back into my body and the blinding pain of surgery, it was now early morning and I would be going home this day. Once home, it was a monumental effort to minimize the pain and the nauseating effects of the pain medication, while taking care of my young children and trying to rest. That night, right after my then husband was home from work and I'd tucked my kids into bed, I determined to get to sleep as soon as possible. I was exhausted, and despite the medication-induced nausea, was able to sleep. Once again, I had the exact same experience, in the exact same order. He once again met me stepping into the bright light, and we resumed our walk and telepathic connection, just as before. This time, after walking and communicating for a while, he asked me to pick a number. I know that sounds crazy, but there was some profound significance to this, which I cannot remember now. I also believe I remember there being others in the periphery of what we were doing during this number picking. If there were departed loved ones present, they were at a little further distance. The beings closest were possibly angels or maybe teachers and guides. I leaned towards teachers and guides because I know they were definitely interested in what I picked, as it had meaning for them as well, yet I can't recall how or why. I sensed that the number picking was somehow related to belief paths and understandings. Prior to making a choice, I felt hesitant, almost as though fearful of making a wrong choice, like a throwback to religious dogma, in which each religion is the only way. However, he reassured me there are no wrong choices, just different choices. Some were more advanced or quicker than others and would either alter or enhance their belief path. Either way, paths were always moving forward despite their differences. When contemplating what number I would choose, I remember seeing a grid or graph similar to an Excel spreadsheet. I know, pretty crazy, right? It made sense at the time, though I had no idea this correlates now. I remember the number 5 seemed visible, but I knew this wasn't the one for me. The other numbers seemed fuzzy and not in focus. It was the number 9 that I knew I needed to choose. Upon choosing number 9, it was relayed to me that this was the very best choice. Though it could be considered contradictory to my present beliefs on the human plane. Again, I did not know what this meant. However, I got the distinct impression that the limiting beliefs, which are the foundations for religious faiths and churches, were incorrect in their premise, but sometimes beneficial as the human construct that they are. As a rigid and constructed path, they had purpose for those that needed the rigidity and constraint. These various faiths can give a framework for belief, even though the belief is not entirely clear, and none are completely correct. There are bits and pieces that are relatable to the truth, though none really capture it all, and how could they? Our comprehension is so limited on this earthly realm. I sense they could be used as a stepping stone for some, and a place of attainment for others. I sensed also there is no judgment associated with being mired in a religious belief system, though growth can be limited or stalled. We can fall victim to judgment or ridicule by those sharing the religious beliefs we hold, should we ever dare to think on our own. I could feel in a very real way this would happen to me if I shared this experience, given the spiritual path I was on at that time. At the conclusion of this number picking, it was time for me to go back once again. It remained the same as times previous, although this time, once I slipped back into my body, it startled me upon waking, because I realized while in my own bed, I had not really been there, not in essence. What would have happened if someone tried to wake me and I didn't respond? Would there have been a 911 call? How could I explain to paramedics where I was? It was an eerie realization. I began to wonder if I should ever share this experience with anyone. How could I ever explain this and not look crazy? Next day, upon sleeping, I had the same experience for the final time, exactly like the previous 2 days. I navigated the tunnel, I left behind my body, eyesight and hearing, arrived through the bright light, and he met me once again, picking up where we had left off. We once again set about walking and communicating. This time seemed a little different, a bit shorter, and not the volume of information. Not long after, he stopped and looked at me. I stopped as well, and turning to look at him, I knew. I reluctantly verbalized the words, "This is the last time, isn't it?" He took my hands in his, and with the warmest and most exuberant joy he smiled wide and said, "It is, but you have been comforted." The enormous significance of these words, spoken just for me at that time, turned a page in my life. This had been my original prayer, to be comforted in my fear and uncertainty, and I had been heard. It was more overwhelming than I can express in words. I had actually believed in my sense of calm before the surgery was the answer to my prayer for comfort. I had no idea that this multi-level experience of spectacular magnitude would be the gateway to a lifetime of rich spiritual journey and the eventual support and coaching of others in their spiritual journey. I didn't want to leave, but knew it was part of my path to go back and live my life with new knowledge. My simple prayer had been answered in the most stunning way possible, and ended up being an impetus for the path I am on today. I knew as well that I had been given a glimpse of the other side and what awaits us. I felt privileged to have been given this gift, while at the same time not knowing exactly what my next steps were. After all, we are all groping in the dark on this side. I didn't speak to anyone about this experience for a long time. I instinctively knew the community of Christian women that had helped me find a small rigid faith, enough of which had caused me to utter the prayer in the first place, wouldn't understand. I wasn't wrong in this. The ones I did venture to tell did not understand, and a few even attributed the experience to something demonic and evil. Some were just quiet and said nothing at all, refraining from giving an opinion one way or the other, but they kept their distance nonetheless. A couple were intrigued and were open enough to believe there are things we know nothing about and that anything is possible. I continued to traverse an orthodox Christian path for many more years that I wish to admit. Because I am a jump in with both feet type of person, I immersed myself completely. I was part of a women's ministry, a Bible study leader, and I took seminary courses in which I ended up accumulating all the criteria to become an ordained minister. Embarrassingly though, I tried very hard to squish my out-of-body or near-death experience into the confines of a Christian framework, but it never really fit. In 2010, I lost 3 family members, the hardest and most tragic being my oldest son. I'd spent the previous 25 years praying for the continued health and safety of him, my daughter and my youngest son, and now my firstborn was gone to a freak and tragic accident that I felt betrayed by and very hurt. I knew prayer wasn't a magic formula, dispensed by God telling who is deserving and who isn't. Or was he? Or was he even there? This tragedy and a couple of paranormal instances in my home days after his passing made me realize I didn't know what I believed anymore. I sure didn't feel like that mature Christian person I'd been studying to be for the last quarter of a century. I felt lost, wounded, and very confused. I also hadn't thought about my out-of-body experience for quite a while either. Not being able to fit into the Christian mold, I'd put it to the back of my mind. Eventually, as I navigated the grief and began unpacking what I knew to be true, such as my out-of-body experience and the paranormal experiences I'd experienced firsthand, I was able to become open-minded enough to look at what I had believed and what I was willing to believe going forward. I was able to look at new possibilities and study at a new level. Why we are here, what is our purpose, and how does that look? I find that I like mental order and to know where my starting point is, what will guide the train per se. My starting point is simple. It's my first article of faith, so to speak, and everything else has been built from there. If God's universe, energy, spirit, or creative force is small enough to be fully understood by the minds of incarnate humans, occupying a small amount of time in each life on a single planet in the vast cosmos, then he, she, they, or it is not big enough to be God. That's it, in a nutshell, what I believe at my core. Everything else is ever evolving as my journey continues and my commitment to that growth strengthens. My goal is to remain teachable, to grow in self-awareness and committed to always learning from others as they pursue their individual path. I do feel that part of my purpose is to help others find their unique path and encourage them as they do. Interestingly, some 28 years after my out-of-body experience and the redirection of my spiritual journey, I was watching TV one night and with my husband, and there was a random program featuring a young prodigal artist named Akane Karamik. The program went on to show some of her paintings, and one of her most paintings is a picture of Jesus. To say I was absolutely stunned at seeing this painting would be an understatement. I nearly fell out of my chair. I hadn't seen this face in nearly 30 years, yet here he was, in her painting. Jesus. I'd never heard of this young artist nor seen any of her work. To this day, I have no idea who she is. But I do know this: her painting of Jesus is exactly who I saw, communicated with, and was comforted by in my out of body experience. I began crying uncontrollably, startling my poor husband, who didn't have a clue what was happening. Once I regained my composure, I went on to explain why I was so overwhelmed and told him in more detail what I had experienced back in 1987. My journey continues, and I am more grateful than ever to have had this experience. Thank you for reading my story. So that was a pretty long one today. I tend to gravitate towards the longer ones these days because I like to have ones that have a bit of a backstory and then the experience and then the wisdom they got from their experience, and it's hard to find ones to read out that tick all those boxes. But this one was quite interesting. It wasn't incredibly amazing on my from my perspective. I've read lots of these now, so but still, it's pretty good. So let's go through it again. So she's in she's a young woman. She's got a couple of kids. She is given some sort of dental surgery, and this looks like there's a few side effects, and this is causing her a severe sinus infection, which leads to her surgery. And like most of us, when she's told she needs surgery, she becomes quite scared. It sends her into a bit of a panic, gives her some anxiety, and she has never had any surgery before. She's never had any general anesthetic. She is really worried, and most of us can relate to this when we've got something approaching in our lives that we aren't looking forward to. The mind starts to go into hyperdrive and start worrying about this and that, and what if that happens, and what if this happens. And in her case, she feels concerned because she's had some family members who have actually died when they have had their anesthetic. So she's worried that that's going to happen to her, and she will lose her children as well. I mean, not lose her children will grow up without a mother in within their lives, and obviously that is a scary thing for any mother to have to imagine. And this kind of starts to get her to think, okay, well, what are some ways I can get rid of this fear of this surgery? Like perhaps she's thinking she should turn to a spiritual path to get some assistance in this challenge that her life is currently facing. So, and then the story sort of goes back a little bit into her history of what religion she was raised as, and she says that she went to a Catholic school when she was younger, and it was a fairly disciplined one. Like in this school, they taught, you have to walk this certain path, otherwise you're not going to find that connection to God. You have to live a sinless life, and when you do that, you can learn to know God a little bit better. But if you don't do that, you're going to end up in hell and end up, having a really difficult life. And I guess there's certain parts of that I can relate to because I had a pretty similar upbringing. Although it wasn't a very strict religion, I wasn't forced to go to school and study it every day or even go to church every week. It was just the belief of a lot of the people I went to school with that this is what God was. It was this thing, this guy. I guess when I was a kid, I used to think God was a big guy in the sky, and he would get, angry at you or punish you if you didn't live a certain way. And although this wasn't drilled into me, it was just some of my friends had pretty religious parents, and this is what they believed. And when I started hearing these sorts of stories, it really did scare me. Like, this woman has been scared as well, and it would just pile on the anxiety, and in the end, it pushed me away from wanting to know more about God, because I didn't feel I could live up to any kind of expectations that religion seemed to put on you and mold you into this certain person that supposedly is the only one capable of getting to know God. And I just didn't understand why we would be put here to suffer and at the same time be expected to connect to a loving God. And it just, the two, the suffering for me pushed me towards escaping my pain in other ways, like drugs. And I didn't understand, like, I couldn't understand what God was, or why God would put us all on a planet where it is really difficult and expect us to be constantly searching for him when, on one hand we're in this really dark place, but on the other hand we're expected to connect to love. And it just, the two worlds for me never really add up, and it's taken me a long time to understand that a little bit better. So she's about to have this surgery. She's trying to figure out what kind of path to take in terms of getting some help with this surgery and getting this fear removed from her experience. And in the end, she finds this little Bible study group with a few other women, and there she is able to find a little bit of direction in terms of connecting to a higher power that is somewhat able to take her fears away of this surgery. So then the surgery happens and she drifts into this next dimension. And yeah, I'll start going through this part again now. So she goes through the tunnel. She sees a being she knows to be Jesus. But when she sees this being, she's also aware that this being is able to, I guess, shapeshift and become a being that is going to be the best representation for the person having that experience based on what their culture and their conditioning and their upbringing has been. And just in her case, because she has had strong ties to Catholic beliefs, this is the form that this being takes. And she gives a bit of a description of what he looked like: average height, average weight, dark hair that was short, green eyes, wore a light coloured, roughly woven short and dark pants. Everything was really average. And it's funny how when people have these experiences, they go into quite a lot of depth as to what the being that they think is Jesus actually looks like. And almost every experience that I've come across, Jesus has, been wearing or looked slightly different in each instance. The thing that stands out to her, though, in this experience is, she says, the smile was the thing that stood out the most to her. He smiled a lot, and it was big and broad, always reaching with his green eyes. It was infectious, and it's the sort of warmth that we really aren't able to experience on this planet. this being was joyful, bubbly, expressive, charismatic, all these things that just make her feel completely at ease, and she is in a place that matches the feeling she's getting from this being as well. Like the surroundings are giving her peace and freedom and feelings of love, and that's just what's vibrating through her own being at this point of the experience. So then they go for a bit of a stroll, she says. They begin communicating telepathically, as you do in this next dimension, and they start, she asks a question in her mind. It's a bit of a weird question, but I guess this is what's popped into her head. And her question is, how do you do a life? I don't really know what that question means. I guess it means, how are you supposed to live in a life on planet Earth? How are you supposed to, function in this place? We're in a strange world here, and we seem to be disconnected from a dimension that we come from, and this place is confusing. And I guess that is what her question means. How do you do a life? In other words, how do you live a life and experience it without fear? In a way, I guess you could interpret that question as well. And to answer her question, this being, Jesus, brings his hands in front of his chest, spreads his hands and forearms in a horizontal arch, and then the next sentence in her experience doesn't explain what he says. It just says the gestures give her the knowledge that everything ever made is perfect and makes complete sense. Absolutely everything was so simple. And with this knowledge, she gets feelings washed over her, and they're just so far beyond words. And just recalling this event is giving her incredible emotion, and she says it even is making her cry. Because with this information, she is getting indescribable joy. She's finally understanding what the facts of our lives are all about. She's getting all the understanding to all the questions all of us humans have. She's finding out who we are at our very core. So for me, this is her discovering what the soul is, and what it is to be back in the soul form, and out of the physical, and removed from all this darkness and negativity that comes with being in the the physical world. So here she is discovering she is a fragmentation of God, I guess, and everything that comes with that is going to be so indescribable and so beyond our human understanding that it's just impossible to write it down in a few words that that the English language has in its existence. It's only a finite number, and this other dimension is an infinite place that probably needs an infinite number of words to describe it as well. So she says at that moment she feels as though she has complete full knowledge. She knows everything, every possible thing you could possibly know. What more can you say to that? Like, what would that feel like? I mean, us as humans are, or I can only talk from my own experience, but I'm always questioning things. I'm always wanting to know why this happens, or why that happens, or why things that way, or what's that person thinking, or it's just, I think it's part of the human experience to constantly crave more knowing, and just wanting to know how everything works, and why everything happens. And it's kind of what drives me a little bit crazy sometimes to not truly understand everything, and to just in the blink of an eye, like I'm just trying to imagine what this is like in the blink of an eye, to have all that removed and to just be overwhelmed and have all this knowledge and wisdom and information suddenly available to you and suddenly become basically who you are. It would, yeah, it would be incredible. There's lots of things that are incredible about these experiences. The love they feel, the connection they get with their soul family, um, the freedom they have, and this is just another one of those things, just the knowledge that they all get. And this, you see this time and time again in most experiences, that people will be inundated with the answers to any question they've ever had. And with this knowledge, she just feels that the worry and the anxiety that drives our daily lives just to melt away. It's like the what ifs don't matter anymore. She's totally at peace with herself and isn't worried about anything at all. She's just totally content and happy and free, and just in a place that it seems so removed from where most of us humans spend a good chunk of our time. I'm just going on my own experience and the amount of time that I spend, either absorbed in my own thoughts, or at least now I can sort of step back and watch my thoughts a little bit and not become so attached to where they're trying to drag me. I still look at them and I see that they are generally leading to some negativity or worry, or about something that has happened or something that will happen, and it's hard, and it's a little bit torturous when you look at your thoughts and realizing how they are, dragging you to a place you want to be. It's only rarely where your thoughts are, in a good place and they're telling you good things. It's that seems to be the minority of the time. When you really sit back and watch how your mind actually works, generally, for me anyway, it's worried about it's dragging you to a less desirable place. And this is what a lot of Buddha's philosophy is, stay in the present moment, don't get attached to your thoughts, just try to be. And it's easier said than done, but when I do reach that space of just being and not in the mind so much, it is much more pleasant, and you just feel more calm and at peace. And if this is a fraction of what it's like to be out of your human body and in spirit form and in this next dimension, then I definitely look forward to seeing what that is truly like. So she's getting all these answers, and all of a sudden everything's making sense, and she gets the plan of the universe, and she sees how her life, she doesn't actually have a life review. She just says that this being with her starts giving commentary on the life that she's lived, and just giving her an external and eternal, I guess, perspective on what's happened in her life and why, and I guess the lessons she's learned from that. But it doesn't actually go into too much detail about what that part was discussed, because unfortunately most of this information is not brought back with her when she enters her physical body. And I think she touches on this later on in the experience, and she says, it's like as she gets back into her body, it's like the water trying to hold on to water in your hand. She just can't do it. It's like as she gets closer to being back into her mind, she feels this information she's had received just slip away, and the human mind just can't, I guess, comprehend or define or label exactly what's happened. And because we just don't have the words for it is probably a possible reason there. We just, we can't translate what happened there back into human mind or English language. It's like two people talking two different languages. They're not going to understand each other or be able to, uh, interpret what the other was saying. And I guess that's the difference between being in spiritual form and human form. That it's like, you're from two different countries and you speak the different language, and it's impossible for the other person to relay what the other said or experienced, because they don't know, that they don't have the language skills to explain it themselves. It's like me moving to China and suddenly, being able to speak the Chinese language, and then coming back to Australia and speaking English again and totally forgetting what the Chinese language is, and trying to tell my fellow Australians to talk to them in Chinese again. It just, yeah, that, all right, it's weird, and I often get frustrated when I read these experiences and they're unable to come back and give us a little bit of wisdom at least. I mean, it happens, but generally speaking, for whatever reason, that the knowledge is greatly less when they are able to write about what's happened to them. And then she pops out of her, she comes back to her body, and the experience ends, and the nurse is, trying to revive her, and she can hear the nurse, but she feels as though, and the nurse is telling her to open her eyes or squeeze her hand, and she can't do this because she feels she's not fully back in her body yet. So she eventually does manage to get back in the body, and she tells the nurse, I'm okay, I just needed some pain meds. And then she slowly recovers, and as her recovery recovery goes on, she goes to sleep at night, and she jumps back into these experiences again. She's able to relive exactly what had happened. She does exactly the same thing. She goes into this tunnel. She meets this being of light, whoever that is, Jesus or whatever label you want to give it, and she continues this conversation. But unfortunately, this conversation is not remembered word for word. So as time goes by, she's always a little bit reluctant to share her experience, because the few she has tried to share, they've kind of labeled her as demonic or evil, while others just didn't say anything at all, but kind of kept their distance once her experience was shared. And just a handful, like one or two, were intrigued enough and were open enough to believe that what she had actually experienced was possible. And that's a little bit upsetting, because these people she shared it with are people from this spiritual group she went to before the experience happened. So these are Christian women, and it just, I would have thought religious people would be very open to any explanation of what the divine is or what happens when you die. I just thought, but it shows how indoctrinated people are into their own belief system, and are so afraid, I guess, in a way, to step out and to get another opinion. It's like their way is the only way, and I've got to be honest, like this even happens to me as well. Like if someone starts telling me that what I believe isn't true, like if someone starts telling me, this stuff you look into isn't real, like it is offensive. But I am trying to be open to every point of view, and even if it kind of hurts a little bit to hear some opinions, and I try to train myself to listen to other ideas, because this concept of God and God, word God is very, very difficult, if not impossible, for our little human minds to understand. In fact, this line here is pretty good. She even, you know, this line here she's written here is kind of explaining why when you cross to the other side and you come back to Earth, you're not able to explain what has happened to you. And it's why religions aren't able to explain the entirety of what God is, because it's an infinite topic, and we are subject to time and space and limitations in this world, and because God is a limitless thing, an infinite thing, explaining what that is impossible, because our minds are conditioned in a limited world. And this is what a line says anyway. It says, if God's universe, the energy, the spirit, or creative force is small enough to be understood by the minds of humans who occupy a tiny amount of time in a tiny little life, in a tiny little planet, in a huge cosmos, then that person is never going to be big enough to be able to explain God. And I kind of see what she's saying there, that we as humans, we're here for such a short amount of time, and we're just in this tiny little planet, and we are such a young species who doesn't, the idea that we can in our human minds ever truly understand the complexity of what God is probably a bit far-fetched. And although this story says that the reason for everything is very simple, it's something she was unable to bring back with her. And you often hear this, that everything's so simple, yet we still can't have it explained to us in human terms, it seems, through these experiences anyway. So yeah, and she just touches on how she loses three members of her family. One of them was her firstborn son. She doesn't say who else. She just says it was an accident. And when this happens, she totally loses her faith. She gets confused. Was God even there? What is God? Like what's going on here? Like why, and this is what happens to all of us, isn't it? We suffer in this life. We go through challenges, and we start to lose that connection or faith or belief or hope or whatever it is in God, or whatever word you use to describe your connection. And it's interesting when and just a quick story on what happened the other day to me at my work in aged care. I was talking to one of the residents who I love dearly, and he is unable to communicate because he has, I don't know, is it Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or something like that. But it's probably not Alzheimer's, because he's still able to fully understand what's going on around him in his experience. Like he can watch a movie from start to finish and understand the whole thing. He's just not able to talk to people. Like, he can just sort of spit out a yes or no answer to any question you might give him. And the other day I walked into his room, and he just suddenly, and he was sitting in his bed, and I thought, okay, this is a little bit unusual for you. Like, you're usually sitting in your chair. What's wrong? Have you got COVID? Are you uncomfortable in your chair? Like, why are you lying in bed in the middle of the day? And like I just said, it's difficult for him to communicate, so he couldn't really tell me. And the only way we can kind of understand each other when he is like that is I have to hand him his iPad and he types out what the answer to the question I'm answering. So anyway, I asked him again, like, why are you lying in bed? Is everything okay? And he just typed into his iPad, I want to die. And I said, and then we just sort of I started talking to him because obviously it's pretty much a one-way conversation about God. I just thought, if he's going to start saying something like that to me, it's probably the good way to start that sort of subject. And then he just miraculously blurted out a few words in a row. He said, God's abandoned me. Like, he said that verbally. And he's suffering because he's just watching his body deteriorate before him, and it is difficult to imagine what that is actually like, but it's horrific, obviously, and he knows that he's getting closer to the end, and with that darkness comes that disconnection from God. And I'm lucky enough in my own experience to notice that connection and feel that the source or the universal God is all around me at all times. And when I find I'm in moments of darkness and challenges, it's something that I push it away. I start getting angry at God. I start saying, why have you made a place that's so bloody hard to navigate and so confusing and so difficult to enjoy? It's hard when you're in those darker moments and your mind is just consumed by fear and just wants out of the situation that it's in. But going back to this man, I just was surprised that he said this, and I just tried to tell him what I just told you, I guess, that God is always there, and sometimes that connection can be severed, and some people are lucky enough to, like myself, have that connection there all the time and know and be constantly reminded that there is a higher power that is with us all the time. But so what I just said to him is, look, just because you can understand what I'm saying, you just can't reply. I just said, look, try to remember all those times in your life where you have felt that connection, where you have felt loved by God, where you have had these, almost paranormal or mystical, supernatural experience. And I think most of us, I guess, I don't know what the percentage is, but, I certainly have had many of these experiences that cannot be explained by what scientists or the medical field will tell you is possible, and they just exceed the barriers of a normal physical event. Most of us, I think, whether it's a series of coincidences or just a song you hear on the radio that is very profound at a certain moment when you need it, or just looking up at the sky and asking for a sign and seeing a shooting star. It could be so many things that just, and it could be, I guess, crossed off as just a coincidence. But for me, I've just had too many of these type of events that the possibilities of them being chalked down to coincidences are very, very remote and, in my mind, impossible. So what I'm trying to say here is, when you are in moments of doubt, I guess just go back to those moments where you believed and you had that knowing that you crave in that moment of darkness. And it might take that pain away just for a brief moment, but a brief moment is better than no moment at all. So this lady, she has all this incredible experience for, I don't know how long it is, over a couple of weeks, where she has 4 or 5 conversations with Jesus in another dimension, and that just blows your mind to start with. But the fact that she comes back and is unable to really share this experience, but still is urged to go and learn more about this stuff. She actually goes to a women's ministry and becomes a Bible study leader and takes courses, and she actually studies enough to become an ordained minister, but she doesn't say if she did or no. I don't think she did actually become a minister, because I think probably because, yeah, it's interesting because this whole story is kind of a discussion on religion and what that confines a person into, and then it takes a look at a near-death experience and shows you the infinite nature and inexplicable nature of it. And it kind of, for me, it resonates a lot, because religion is just seems very regimented and confined, and like this experience says, it definitely has its place, because it guides people to the place they need to get to, usually to find God. But it can also backfire, because people are just believing what they're being taught rather than having an experience themselves and finding out for themselves exactly what these religions, I think, are trying to teach. And that is something magical and inexplicable and miraculous. And I guess to fully understand the core message of what religion's trying to tell us, you need to have an experience where you can relate to that. And I've got this Bible app where I get the occasional message pop up, and I'm like, wow, like, I've never read the Bible myself, but I'm like, wow, like these guys, I've had these kind of guidance to believe what this phrase says in my own life. Like, it's just, yeah, it's just incredible. And for those of you who have that connection to the divine would know what I'm talking about. And it's difficult to articulate, but I'm just a human like you, and I just want to know more about this stuff and get this infinite knowledge that I know is pretty much unattainable in my own little experience as Nick Dove. But it's not going to stop me trying. So you got to give it a crack and see if you can find out these big answers as to why we're here and what our purpose is, and how we can, I guess, make this world a better place. But yeah, this has gone on for too long today. I don't think I will wrap it up with a minute's peace and quiet. I'll just end it there, and thank you again for enjoying, joining me in, or hopefully joining me in another experience from the nderf.org website. If you've come across any good experiences that you would like me to read out, please just let me know. My email is podafterlife@gmail.com, or if you just want to say hi, just write me out a quick email and we can connect that way. But thank you for listening, and hope you've got something out of this one. And remember, I love you all, and I look forward to doing my next episode. So talk to you then.